All right, welcome back to the program. It is all interesting, and my guest today, again, 21 days out to the election, David D. Chapman, political analyst of the Chapman Show. You can follow him on X at what is it again, David?
David Chapman,
All
141.
right, David, we got 21 days, 3 weeks from today. We will all be going to the polls, except for the people that voted early, which we'll get into. Where do you see the race today, October 15th?
Um, Pretty much where everybody thought the race would be. So a couple of months ago, Mark Halperin took a lot of heat, but he predicted that once all the noise and all the response bias would dissipate, Harris's 2 point national lead would not be enough, and everybody because Trump is a really good closer. This is exactly where we're at now, as everything is dissipated. Harris now her lead in RCP today has fallen to 1.4. And that's not that today. If the election were today, she would lose the electoral college. But we still have 3 weeks, and Trump continues to close. She's still at this point, traditionally with a Republican, the gains that they make with African Americans and Hispanics will have dissipated by now. Trump is still holding on to those gains, so we are made to believe those are still going to be there on election day. So she's basically going to be depending on unrealistic gains in the suburbs because she's bleeding even in the urban areas with working class in urban areas and African American votes in the urban areas. So, and but their idea of the suburbs is not a universal suburb. The educated white suburban mom is not every suburb. In Michigan, there's a lot of
So
working
there's
class
a lot of
suburbs.
working
So,
class suburbs in a lot of these key swing states.
yes. And so if they're depending on these unrealistic gains in the suburbs, it's not going to pan out because in Michigan and in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, there's a lot of working class suburbs where it's going to go 2-1 for Trump. And then in the rural areas, essentially she's maxed out and she's bleeding out, and there's really no place for her to go. That's why you see her on Fox News. She needs a bigger audience. Trump won't give her a debate, so she needs something. She needs an audience somewhere to talk to someone, something to change the trajectory of the race. Because as I've been talking about on my show with my followers, the last 2-3 weeks, I've been talking about the trend lines in RCP has been up, 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 and down, down, down for Trump and her. And it has not changed for the last 2-3 weeks. And I don't think that there's much she can do to change the trajectory of the race. And Trump was smart to not give her a debate because that would be something that could change
Should
something.
we take any and you reference RCP? So we're looking at the RCP polling right now. There's only one state, which I think this is the first time in this cycle that it's been that way since Harris got into the race, where she's only leading in one state in the electoral college averages. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, and now Nevada. Trump is ahead, albeit by all small margins. But Harris still leads in Wisconsin. But what do you make of the fact that RCP, when looking at those averages, they don't weight their polls any differently? So should that be a cause of concern for either of the candidates to say, oh, okay, well, we're just taking every single poll and we're just putting in here and that's what the average is?
Well, that's actually what you want. It's a straight up the middle. I'm just going to give you the average and you take it how you want it. Whereas what Nate Silver does is he takes a Republican or a media university or a Democrat poll and he assumes a bias and he will adjust the poll and then throw it into an average. And that's how, or even 538 does that. And that's how you have their aggregates with her up 4 nationally as opposed to 1.2. None of these polls are showing her with a lead of 4 or 5 except for Morning Consult. Yet these aggregates are adjusting these leads based on perceived biases. So no, RCP, what they do where they just plug it into an aggregate and then let us see for ourselves, that is, I like that. That's a good thing. And they also let us know where things were at this point in the race last time and 8 years ago too. They're very transparent and they don't put their thumb on the scale. And also going all the way back to 2000, RCP not only invented polling aggregates, but they have historically been the most accurate polling aggregate. So if you see Trump, and yes, it also often underestimates Trump, but they by far underestimate Trump by less than these other
Mm.
models. So if Trump is leading in these aggregates, it's a good chance that Trump is going to win these states. However, except for in Arizona and Georgia, where those aggregates have historically been very accurate in the Trump era. So you on election day, you want Trump to be leading in those
Well, it
aggregates.
seems like the bottom is falling out for Harris in Nevada, in Arizona, because even the New York Times poll
Yes.
over the weekend had her down 5 now in Arizona.
And that New York Times poll a month ago was Harris plus 5-2. The only difference is Trump was at 51 this time as opposed to 50. So the race in Arizona doesn't seem to be changing. Trump seems to have a stranglehold on Arizona very comfortably. And as I pointed out to other people, no one's really campaigning in Arizona. Trump made a stop at Arizona earlier last week because he was in California, so he just stopped there, right? Harris went there recently because she was in the border. Why would you go to the border of Texas or New Mexico? Go to Arizona. That's the swing state. But no one's actually campaigning there like they're campaigning in Georgia or North Carolina or in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, or even
Mm.
Nevada.
It does,
Arizona is by far the least campaign state of this cycle, which would tell you that Trump's probably going to win it comfortably.
well, let me ask you. Actually, and you brought up Mark Halpern initially in your first point, and Halpern
Mhm.
was the one that really had his finger on the pulse when it came to Biden dropping out. He predicted the
Yeah,
day it was going to happen. He was talking to numerous sources
yeah.
within the White House, within both parties. So he seems
He took a lot
he
of crap
did.
for that
Yes, he
too,
absolutely did.
and he was dead on.
Yes, his new two-way program is pretty good. I encourage people to check it. I
I
like it
like
a
it.
lot. He's got
I
people from
keep
all
getting
sides
it.
of the
Right.
aisle. It's great. All right, so it seems like last week there were the national polls that came out, which still showed Harris ahead. There was the ABC, CBS, and New York Times poll. I think the New York Times one was tied, and then the other showed her ahead ever so slightly. Then what ensued was some type of democratic freakout. Uh, what do you believe was causing that? She is still, there are numerous polls that are showing her ahead in Pennsylvania, ahead on the national scale, ahead in Michigan, ahead in Wisconsin. Because the way I'm looking at it is if she is able to keep the three Rust Belt states between Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio and Wisconsin, she will most likely win the election. So why do you think now there is this there is this somewhat of a freak out on the Democratic side?
One, it's the trend downward. Two, it's her lack of campaigning. If you notice that in September, Trump did more campaign events than both Harris and Walz combined. Another point is that if you look at the RCP aggregates in Pennsylvania, there is a lot more red than there is blue. Same in Michigan. There's a lot more red in those polls than blue. Same in Wisconsin. And you can go state by state. There is far more red than there is blue. And that's why Trump is leading in those aggregates. So there are plenty of polls that show Trump Harris leading in these states. But there are 2-1, 3-1 more polls where Trump is leading in those states than Harris. And then when you get to the national polls, um, Harris is only leading by one, by two. It's even. That is not good
So
enough, as we know
yeah,
from
on that, what
2016.
do you make of the fact that the old adage or the traditional view on that is for a Democratic candidate to be up in the national polling, for them to essentially have a safe way to get to the electoral college, they need to be up about 3 or 4 points. However, in this election, and particularly based on 2022 numbers, there are more Republicans voting in Florida. There are more Republicans voting in New York and California, and maybe even and maybe there's more Republicans this cycle voting in those states. So based on that, couldn't the argument be made that, oh, well, yeah, she's up 2 in the national polling, but the Trump numbers are just coming from states that she's going to win anyway, or the Republicans are going to win anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
That's a misunderstanding of the electoral college bias. The electoral college bias is there's an overrepresentation of white working class voters in the Rust Belt that Trump overperforms with based on past Republican candidates, and it allows him to win electorally rich states and gives him more than a good shot to win the electoral college despite losing the popular vote. He can do better in Maryland and California and Florida, and it'll have no impact on whether he wins Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin or by how much, because that has nothing to do with white working class voters and their overrepresentation and the lack of representation of college educated whites in the Rust Belt as well. So that's what it is, and people are misunderstanding what the bias
Mm.
is, and that actually, if she's doing worse in blue states and red states, that's actually why the popular vote is closer. That doesn't mean that the bias has
Mm.
shrunk. That means that Trump has a better shot of winning the popular vote.
Oh, that's an interesting point, David. Okay, I hadn't thought about it that way. So you and I spoke last week. There was a poll I think that came out. I sent you a text about it, of some New Hampshire poll that had Trump with,
Mhm.
I think, close-ish to the margin of error. But then there was some Twitter account that essentially skewed it or weighted it, and it showed him ahead based on the weighted or the skewed polling. But what does that actually mean, and is it anything that we can take seriously? Not necessarily just about this New Hampshire poll, but just in general.
So back in 2012, there was the unskewing of the polls. Now, granted, I was still in high school, so I didn't live through this, but I know as a seasoned political analyst now that anything that's unskewing of the polls, they would go in there. Oh, it's a D+9. Oh, the electorate's going to be R+2, so they would rework the data and then say, oh, really, Romney's leading, not Obama. Oh, that's why they say, oh, Romney was going to win Ohio. If you go back and look at the footage on election night, Karl Rove is frantically trying
I
to
do
find
remember that.
voters
I
in
remember
Ohio.
that.
He's trying to find like don't call Ohio yet. There's still voters out in this county. No, that's unskewing the polls. Because listen, yes, the polls are democratically biased, but you can't rework the data into your favor because not only will it not work, but when it doesn't work, you look like Karl Rove of a movie.
I do remember that night watching the election returns, and I think Karl Rove went back into the studio, to the production studio, and was having a conversation. And clearly, it was the right call. I mean, everybody had that call at that point.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Obama won Ohio. There was no Romney had no chance in
Well, let me
Ohio,
ask you that.
but that was
Yeah,
the
no, go
yeah.
ahead. No, you
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that's the unskew the poll crowd. They were desperately trying to figure out, oh, this electorate looks better for them than it really was by taking polls that were already conducted and making them more
Hmm.
favorable to them.
Well, back in 2012, I think there's the messaging that's out there now saying, "Hey, look, after the first debate, a lot of the aggregate polling was showing Romney in the lead of Obama, and now, and you saw how that race ended, and now you can make the same argument of saying, hey, Trump's in the lead in the aggregate against Harris, so why wouldn't it just turn out the same way as it did in 2012? What's your response to that?"
Well, a lot of people are going in, but I'd actually argue that Trump is in Obama's position, a small but steady and durable lead throughout. And like go back 2 months, who was leading or tied in Pennsylvania in the aggregate? Trump. Same in Georgia, same in Arizona, same in North Carolina. And we've talked about this on
Mm-hmm.
this show multiple times. Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. That's the game. Trump has had a small but durable lead throughout. That's what Obama had, and they just ended up underestimating Obama because they underestimated the number of black men that
Mm-hmm.
would actually show up to vote for him. Um, but yeah, I would actually say that Trump is in Obama's position, not Romney's position. They're correlating R's and R's with D's, and not
And the
numbers.
coalitions between what the Republican electorate looked like in 2012 versus the Republican
Mm-hmm.
electorate now, and the Democrat electorate in 2012 and the Democrat electorate now, it is wildly different.
Oh yeah.
Especially as you've mentioned before, Obama did incredibly well with white working class voters. And Trump has
hmm
basically taken that spot for Obama.
Yep, that and Trump, even though he's not winning black men, he is getting about 15-20%. Doing a little bit better with black women. Hispanics are historically good among Republicans and Hispanic women. The It's almost like a reverse Obama
Mm.
coalition. Um, Not an Obama coalition, but like as if it were a Republican doing those numbers. So if you look at it by the numbers and by the comparison, not just R to R and D to D, then Trump is actually in the Obama position, not the Romney position.
Let me ask you on the inverse. There's also the notion that the Democrats, as much as maybe there's some freak out in terms of what the polling has looked like over the last week, that they are having their get out the vote machine work for them in the swing states, particularly Pennsylvania and Michigan, and that Harris and her campaign are banking early votes, which will be almost impossible for the GOP to overcome. What do you make of that?
So there's two things. One, if you look at the number of votes they have banked, not the if you go to Target early voting and you'll see the number or the margin of which who's leading. Ignore that. Look at the volume of votes banked, and
So
at this point,
do you mean the actual raw number of votes banked? Okay.
percentage, raw number of votes banked, the Democrats are. I want to be a little conservative on this. About 700,000 votes behind their 2020
Which would be
numbers,
somewhat understandable,
and
right? Just
and that's in
right, right.
Pennsylvania, to be clear.
But that would be
Um,
somewhat understandable, right? Just based on the fact that 2020 was a pandemic year and
right,
58% of voters
but
voted by
there
mail.
right, and but there's two things to that 2020 comparison. One, um, how many of the people who are now voting by not voting by mail this time are actually going to go vote in person or early? And two, there were a lot of people who had never voted before in 2020 and otherwise would have never voted for the very exciting and robust Joe Biden. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic because he had the lowest level of enthusiasm recorded in a poll ever. But he still was able to win because of mail ballots were showing up to people's houses. They were filling them out, and then there were people showing up and
Mm-hmm.
picking them up, the post office or ballot harvesters or whatever. Nothing
Right.
illegal,
Yep.
just very
Yes.
organized by the Democrats. And there were people who were not otherwise probably never voted or maybe voted in 1996 for Bill Clinton, and that was it. And then they voted here because it was so
Mm.
convenient. How many of those people are going to go wait in line? How many of those people requested ballots this time because they didn't show up to their
Mm.
house? Barnes, I don't know if you know who
Yep.
Robert
Yep.
Barnes is. He revised his turnout models down by 5 million because he does not think that many of those people will turn out to
Now,
vote.
David, you've also been focusing on the lower propensity voters for both
Yes.
sides. So let's just stick on Pennsylvania since we're discussing it. So what is it?
Mhm. Sure.
What can or even or any of the other swing states? What is your data? What are you looking at regarding lower propensity voters for both campaigns?
So, two things, and I could have put it in with the first point, but anyway, the lower propensity for Trump is getting out, and that's like the flip side. So you got the COVID years, people they're not going to come out, but those were Democrat voters. These are like new Gen X voters, young males who will be coming out. The type of people that Trump is reaching out on all these podcasts that he's going on. They are going out. We're seeing it big time in the early voting in Virginia, which is scaring the Democrats because
Yeah, I want to
they're
get to
literally,
that. But you know what? Let's talk about that. What is going on in
yeah.
Virginia? I see a lot of stuff on X from both sides of the aisle saying, look, the Democrats are not voting in the districts that are safely Democrat from in numbers that were even somewhat expected on a lower scale from 2020 and 2022. And the Republican counties are completely outpacing themselves.
Yeah,
Now, I think an
yeah.
argument could be made that on the Republican side, these are people that are just voting by mail and they just won't show up on election day because they're people that would vote on election day anyway. But at the same time, the numbers are pretty skewed in Virginia. I still would think that Virginia would go the way that everybody expects it to go. But do you think there could be a late night in Virginia on election day?
It's going to be closer no matter what. Also, you can see that the first time and low propensity voters are the ones for Republicans who are voting early, and the high propensity voters in Virginia are not voting. So the Republicans are not cannibalizing their vote in Virginia. Also, the Department of Justice is suing the governor of Virginia because he purged the voter rolls and updated them and cleaned them off. You know, people who aren't living in Virginia anymore, people who are illegally on, maybe died, stuff that you're supposed to do. That's what we call a red flag for a losing campaign, is that they're now suing to reinforce, or what you would call a firewall. But yeah, why else would you sue?
Well,
Um,
what do you make of the firewall that the Democrats are putting out there, saying, or at least not the Democrats generally, but from people you and I follow on X, of saying that, okay, if the Democrats can bank 390 or 400,000 votes in Pennsylvania as a firewall, that should be having them feeling really comfortable for election day.
400,000 is too small. I mean, they already have 400. They have what,
I'm sorry, a
300,000 now?
400,000 delta, a lead of 400,000 over a
Oh,
month. Yeah,
lead of
yeah.
400,000. I mean, maybe not really. I mean, they had like 1.6 in volume in 2020, and the Republicans had like 290,000 in volume in 2020, and Biden still only won by one
I
point.
think the
So I'm
Yeah,
not
I think
sure.
the problem is
I'm
for
not. I'm not sure how 400 in Delta is going to work
I
for
think
them.
the
I think it's a
I
dream.
think the problem for both, for anybody looking at this, is we have to make assumptions, and we just don't know what is going to
Mhm.
happen with the assumptions based on what's actually going to happen on November 5th. And there were assumptions made in 2020 that were wildly incorrect. There were assumptions made in 2022 that were wildly incorrect, flipping from Republican to Democrat. And now there's assumptions being made in 2024. And based on that, I saw an interview last week, and I wanted your take on this, with Larry Sabato. And Larry Sabato from the Crystal Ball from the University of Virginia said that pollsters this year are working essentially to redo their poll modeling to essentially count that undercounted Trump voter, which the polls missed in both 2016 and 2020. He didn't expand on how they're doing it, but he said that that's being done. Do you think that's something now we're seeing in the polling of why Trump is leading now in the aggregate? Or is this just something we don't know yet and we'll have to just wait and see until the election day?
There's already signs that they're not doing it. Like, for example, when the New York Times had an even race nationally and then a Harris +4 in Pennsylvania, those things don't exist in the same world. Same with when RMG had an even race nationally and then Trump +2 in Florida. You're telling me that Trump's going to win Florida by 2016 margins, but he's going to be tied in the popular vote? Those things don't exist in the same world. So they're clearly still having the same issues. You look at the North Carolina polling, even the most accurate poll firm, Atlas Intel, had Harris +3 in North Carolina, which everybody knows Harris isn't going to do 2.5 points better than Barack Obama in North Carolina.
When was that
Um,
poll done?
oh,
I think that was a
I don't know, a
while.
month
Right, right.
ago.
I think the latest one
Yeah,
in North
yeah,
Carolina was a tie at 47-47 by the Wall Street Journal, and the Wall Street Journal polling had Trump +6 in Nevada the other day.
right. And that's another good example of the Wall Street Journal polls were all over the place. That in no world does the Wall Street Journal electorate exist.
So here, let's go through
They're
that.
all
So Friday, October 11th, there was a big dump on the Wall Street Journal polling. So Pennsylvania, Trump won. Michigan, Harris 2. Wisconsin, tie 48-48. Arizona, Harris 2, which just doesn't make sense to me based on a New York Times poll of Trump 5. And Nevada, Trump 6. North Carolina, tie. Georgia, Harris 2. So, you look at some of those, you say, okay, well, that's kind of around where the polling has been. But then you look at Nevada, Trump 6. I don't know. That just doesn't seem likely based on
it's not Nevada plus Trump plus 6 and then Harris plus 2
right,
in Arizona. It doesn't
right,
work that
right.
way.
That just doesn't seem.
That's
Yeah,
why
go ahead.
that's why I would argue that they're still having the same problems. Um, you can also
Especially also,
you
David,
can
with
also
these wild swings that occur, right? Because how you
yes,
you mentioned
yep.
before we got on, the New York Times had Harris +5 a month ago, and now they have Trump +5. How does a 10-point swing occur in 30 days?
What was the other one? Yahoo News YouGov went from Harris plus 6 to even in about 3 weeks' time, and the electorate doesn't move that way. Opinions don't change by 6 points in 3 weeks. Um, Part of that's response bias, some of that's response
Mm,
rates, some of that's who you're talking to. But it would all suggest that they're still having the same problems that they had before. They obviously still have the same budgets, and some of the problems in the polling industry is budgets. When they reach a problem or they discover something in polling, a lot of times the best thing to do is to go out and get a bigger sample size to account
mm.
for it. But in media and university and all these things, they have their grants, their budgets. They can't go over it. So
Well, yeah,
where
go ahead. No, no, I'm
right,
sorry. Go ahead.
yeah. So when they can't go over it, so if you hit a wall and you can't finish the poll, you're going to end up with a Harris +7, and well, you're wrong, but you could spike the poll, but they're not going
So,
to.
you mentioned
Um,
2012 before. I remember about a week before the election, there was a national Romney poll that had Romney up 7, right? And I think everybody pretty much
mhm.
realized there's no way that that's true, right? And it was so beyond
No.
off.
Romney in that election, Romney never led. All the polls that had him leading were
Mm,
wrong, and he never led. When he had that lead after the debate, he wasn't leading. It was a response
mm,
bias. The Democrats were depressed. They didn't want to answer polls because Romney he kicked Obama's
mm-hmm,
butt in that
mm-hmm.
debate. It was a response bias. There were more Republicans than Democrats answering polls for a 2-3 week period, showing a Romney lead in the polls, but it wasn't a real lead.
All right, we got 21 days out. I know we talk about this as we're coming down to the wire. So if the campaigns want my free advice, I'm looking at it from Arizona off the board, North Carolina probably off the board, and now we're looking essentially at Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. I think the Harris campaign would probably be wise to spend more resources in Georgia because if they could somehow flip that, it makes her path a lot easier. And for Trump, essentially, he really just needs one Rust Belt state. If he wins one Rust Belt state, he is certainly in the driver's seat on the path to 270. Do you agree with my assessment?
Yeah, I think that I would say that Georgia's probably gone too. I think the Sun Belt's gone for her, and yeah, I think you're right. All Trump has to do is win one Rust Belt state, and this thing's
So
over.
for her, so for Harris, it's really tantamount to maintaining that blue wall and trying to pick off a
Yeah.
Sun Belt state because I think that would get her to where she needs to be.
Well, actually, if she wins all of the blue wall and Nebraska's second, she gets there at
Okay,
276.
let's see. Let me look at the right now.
But it gets her at 276. The problem is
Yes,
though,
with Nevada,
Pennsylvania.
right? With Nevada, she gets to two with
Yes,
yeah
yes.
with Nevada. With if she just
Without
two
Nevada,
seventy.
without Nevada, it's
Yep.
270. The problem is Pennsylvania is slipping away
Mm-hmm.
fast, and so because of that, you're kind of right with Georgia or North Carolina. She needs something because I don't think Pennsylvania is going to be there. I don't think anybody thinks Pennsylvania is going to be there. I mean, Mark Halperin said it. Everybody who has insider knowledge has said it. that they don't think Pennsylvania is going to be there. So they probably, if they're going to win this, they probably need to pick off a North Carolina or a Georgia, but they still have to defend
Hmm.
Nevada because Georgia and North Carolina aren't 19; they're
Right,
16.
right. So for the Harris camp, last 3 weeks, do whatever you can to maintain that blue wall. For the Trump, for the last 3 weeks, break the blue wall and pick up one of those other Sun Belt states. And for them, I think for either of them, that really is the position they're trying to be in. I guess if I were the Harris camp, I'll revise it based on what we just said, based on the math. Spend all your time in those three states because that'll essentially get you to 270 between Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And if you're Trump, just whichever of those Rust Belt states you think you have the best chance of winning, probably spend the most time there.
Um, if the NBC poll where it has Trump +1 nationally is correct, though, this thing's over. Because under no circumstances will she win the Electoral College and lose the popular vote.
So out of Michigan and Wisconsin, how do you look at those two? Do you look at them as a tandem? I know Michigan traditionally has swung a little further to the left, and I think we've spoken about that. Out of all those
Right.
three, Michigan would probably be the best. She's doing the strongest in Michigan. How are you seeing?
Yes.
How are you seeing between Michigan and Wisconsin now?
I think Wisconsin is probably already there. It's just lagging in the polls. It tends to poll to the
Very
left
difficult state
and
to
in vote
poll
to
as
the right.
well.
Yes, yes. That in North Carolina, terrible to the poll. Wisconsin polls to the left and votes to the right. And you can see it in the aggregate, too. It's aggregating to the left of Michigan. So, but if what we saw with Barris's show yesterday, he had a new poll out, and it looks really bad for Harris in Michigan. She's only getting 60% of Arab Americans. Biden got like 91% of Arab Americans. That could be a huge problem for her. Not to mention her problems with unions and the UAW there, and her slippage in African American support. Michigan is getting very tough for her and very fast.
Well, let me ask you this one final. Well, I'll give you the last word, but I do have one more question. Why do you
Sure.
think Nevada has essentially turned into this sort of a white whale for Republicans? George Bush won it in 2004. George Bush won it in 2000, right, 2000 and 2004. And then it's been solidly Democrat since 2008. It has a working class electorate. Trump still has not been able to win it, either in 2016 or 2020. What is it about Nevada, the makeup, demographics, socioeconomic, that you think has kept Nevada in the Democratic coffers since 2004?
Harry Reid's machine and the Culinary Union. And the Culinary Union just came out the other day and said that ignore the polls, Trump's going to win Nevada. And they've done this several times. When Harry Reid was behind, they said ignore the polls, Harry Reid's going to win. Harry Reid won. They said it in 2020 when Trump was leading in Nevada. They said ignore the polls, Biden's going to win. Biden won Nevada. Now they're saying ignore the polls, Trump's going to win Nevada.
I think that was in 2010,
The
right, when
Col-
Harry Reid went against Sharon Angle, and he was
yes,
down. He was
yep,
down big.
five
Yep.
points. 5 points. It was a 10 point
Yep.
swing. So the Culinary Union is essentially the entire strip of Las
Mm.
Vegas, and pretty much throughout the state, all your service industries. So if the Culinary Union is saying Trump's going to win, that means the Culinary Union is going to vote for Trump, even though they technically endorsed Harris. Their people are going to vote for
Mm.
Trump. And so if they're going to vote for Trump, Trump has a hugely good chance at winning
I think
Nevada.
Trump should take that word up. He's been using bigly, but I like the hugely. I think Trump should.
I like hugely too.
All right, David. 21 days to go. I'm sure we're going to talk again. Thank you so much for coming on. I'll give you the last word.
Mhm. I have Seth Levy on Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. For those watching, please come join me on this
All right,
Thursday. It's going to be a great
perfect. We'll
show.
get that posted before Thursday. And David, thank you again. We'll talk soon.